All right, welcome back. My name is Amy Stewart, and I am doing a raw reaction of episode 4 of season 3 of The Wheel of Time. With me off camera is my husband, who doesn't care about social media, but will chime in because he is also a fan of this book series. So, we just watched episode 4, which I feel is the best episode of The Wheel of Time in any season, any episode, any season to date. Billy, what are your thoughts?
Very much agree. And part of it being that, oh yes, it was following the source material, but that's not really the entire reason why. It's because they basically didn't try to mess with the source material. And that's where, like, so many episodes run into problems.
Yeah. I think a lot of there are a lot of apologists for this show who talk about how it's really great and they had to make so many changes in order to make the show. And then there are people who dislike the show because it does not follow the source material as closely as it could. I don't know of, and I'm certainly not one of the people who thinks or expects that the TV show is going to be exactly the same as the books. I don't think anyone who is like a reasonable understanding of adaptations can expect that. So there were differences in this episode that are not exactly one-to-one what happens in the books, but for the most part, I felt like they were reasonable changes.
Agreed. Yeah.
And anything that wasn't was pretty small. Like, there were some small things where I was like, I don't know if I like that, but it wasn't, like, disruptive to my understanding of the story and didn't, like, destroy the narrative or the lore, the magic system in the way that we've seen changes in other episodes do.
Yeah, everything was largely consistent as well because of it.
Yeah, for the most part.
Which is good because, like, the entire point of the Rhuidean trip is to get the history of the Aiel.
The history of the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you can't really, like, mess with it too much without just completely wrecking everything.
You can't, but I was worried they would because they have messed with other things that I didn't think that you should mess with, and they messed with them. So my fear going into this episode was that they were going to, like, change it to the history of Luz Theron, like do the prologue of the books instead of the Rhuidean storyline, and they didn't do that, thank goodness. It was a pretty close adaptation or a pretty close interpretation of what happens to the books. Again, not exactly the same, but, like, it was fun to watch that come to the screen.
Yes.
And, like, be able to experience it as opposed to feeling frustrated by huge sweeping changes that don't actually add to the story.
And this was a great one for them to flex their just cinematography.
Yes,
for the
visuals.
city design and everything. Like,
yeah, visuals were good.
This was one of, they had it lined up well, they swung out and actually hit it this time.
Yep, they actually hit it. They hit the ball. Good job.
Yep.
Good job. All right, so we'll go through it line by line, or not line by line. We'll go through it scene by scene based on my notes this time instead of pausing every few minutes to critique. And we elected to do that in part because the last couple of reviews have been overly long. Even just the review part of it, but also then on top of that, watching the episodes, which takes us like 3 hours to get through one episode, which is just too much time. So we are truncating that for this episode, but it was a good experience, and I think it helps that we didn't have a lot of jumping around this episode. It was pretty much the entire thing was this.
Which I think went much better.
Yeah.
And part of that could be because, and this was more theorized by Brandon Sanderson, that the script writers were, like, independent from each other completely.
Yeah.
And so you're probably having someone write multiple scenes for different locations.
Which is harder.
And just having one writer writing this one scene worked well.
I think this writer, I feel, read this section of the book and took as much as they could from the dialogue with the understanding of, like, larger arc changes that have been agreed upon by the studio for the production of the episode, and I really appreciate that. And I wish all of the episode writers did that. But, you know, some of them take more creative license, and we give our opinions when we disagree with what they did. So, digging into it, this episode opens with Rand and Lan having some more sword play where they are doing their instructions, and we finally get the Flame in the Void 4 books too late from when it's originally introduced, and we see Rand learning some skills and talking about his history with his father, teaching him to do this with the bow, and having a bit of a heart-to-heart with Lan about what he can and can't be. We didn't get the whole duty is death is light as a feather, duty is heavier than a mountain, which I think is the most important lesson that Lan teaches Rand in the books, which is also kind of a toxic lesson in some ways. Yeah, he has to kind of unlearn that towards the end of the series because it does almost break him.
Yes.
Yeah.
My guess is that's probably still going to be coming while he still has Lan, but it might be like a Lan tells them that as he like rides off to do something else.
Potentially, or they'll just leave it out of the story altogether.
Yeah.
To be determined. But we like that scene. So then Moiraine and Egwene are watching this from a little ways away, and one small critique of this episode, again, overall we liked it, is that Moiraine tells Egwene that, a watched pot never boils, or a paraphrase of that, which it's not like a bad phrase, but it didn't really apply to the situation, and it's a modern colloquium when we have idioms galore in the book material that I wish they had pulled from.
Correct.
There's so many. There's so many sayings from the Wheel of Time that they could have pulled from that are just like great little tidbits of wisdom that feel very like folksy and are part of the world building. So small criticism there. Yeah. Do you have any comments on that scene otherwise?
No, in general, I also like their choice to include more of the sword practice.
Yeah.
As the use of the sword is fairly pivotal and actually explained within the episode.
Yep.
So it was timely to have that happen.
Yeah, and they might have held off on some of those training sessions knowing that they needed that as part of the framing, but I don't know. There was so much crap that they included in seasons 1 and 2 that I would have preferred from the books instead of the time that they spent on like Logain in a sanctuary and Moiraine having altercations with her sister, who's like not a real character.
I preferred if it was a bit more consistent of them.
Yeah.
Showing like brief snippets of him practicing. You don't have to like have a 5-minute sword training.
A little montage in the distance,
but more of like whenever they're stopped for something and someone besides Rand is talking, he's over on the side practicing
learning the use of the sword that his father gave him.
Yeah, but anyway, this time
it's okay.
It hit well.
It's all right. Yeah. Okay, so then we have more of the Aiel culture than I honestly expected this show to give us, which, again, I enjoyed. So we have a scene where we get a lot of information dropped about Giotto, the Gaishane, how the honor system works among the Aiel. Probably a lot to absorb if you haven't read the books, but I want to say it was like line for line from the books, but I did detect many lines that were from the books in that conversation, and liked it overall. Moiraine was a little bit snooty with the Aiel in the scene, which was not her character from the books. She's so much more unlikable in the TV show than she is in the books. But she gives some like, well, you keep giving us answers to questions that we didn't ask. It's like, bitch, you literally just asked. Yeah. Why the wise ones have servants and no one else at Egwene did, but as a pair. And it just, I don't know, it was unnecessary for her to have been that rude to the Aiel. They do mention, I say they, it's Bear apparently, and not Amis or Amy's. They've conflated Bear and Amy's into one character, but I don't know why they chose to call her Bear. Maybe they just like the name better, and I know it's Bear because it showed it in the subtitles, which we eventually turned on, instead of Amis or Amy's, however you say it, and she's the wife of Rhuidean and the one who can channel and the Dreamwalker, and instead they took the other wise one who is a Dreamwalker but cannot channel, is not a wife of Rhuidean, and they named the character Bear. Yeah. For reasons unknown. So I guess that's and then Moiraine is there too, but she's not very nice, whereas Moiraine in the books I want to say was one of the sweeter wise ones. She was nice.
Yeah, but there's some differences in how that approaches, but overall fine.
There's not a character I'm gonna hang my hat on for how accurate.
It's also one of those things where the Aiel culture was something that kind of was absorbed slowly over the books.
Yes.
It's very much you guys do what? And I don't understand the whole Gaishin and their sense of honor.
Takes a while to get it. They get a lot of explanations up front, but you have to kind of see it several times in several situations before it gels as a witness to what's going on. So anyway, then we have a conversation between Aviendha and Lan where she is telling Rand not to use a sword, and then tells Lan he also shouldn't use a sword, and instead of acquiescing, which would have been more in character for Lan, he engages in an exhibition fight with Aviendha to prove something. I didn't like the characterization. I don't like what this says about Lan, but I understood why they added this scene because it gives us a bit of a fun action sequence at the beginning of the episode. It shows how much Aviendha loves being a Maiden of the Spear right before she's asked to give up her spears. It shows us that Lan can hold his own in a fight with the Aiel, and so, like, it did some character building there. It just wasn't, like, it didn't make sense for the piece of Rhuidean for them to, like, have this fight, and it didn't make sense for Lan's character to have to, like, prove his warriorhood in this way. But it was fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the whole goal was to lead up for the Aviendha.
Exactly, yeah. They're making some creative license.
Did kind of help it flow by making that strong.
Yeah.
Also,
Let it pass.
Older Wide one that was able to snap 2 spears at once over her knee. That was impressive.
Was it 2?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So Bear comes and she's just like, I got this.
Like,
it's easy.
1, perfectly good spear still. Why? And 2, that's a strong one.
No, they do, I think, actually break her spears.
Oh, yeah.
I'm trying to remember. I know she has to at least break them down herself and then turn them into children's toys or bits of functional something.
Okay,
I don't know if they break them, but they definitely are destroyed as part of the ritual, like, through a process. I'd have to go back and look, like, exactly what happens at that point. But,
I would say not super critical things to change. No. And I think it worked out well.
Yeah. So then Aviendha is also asked to disrobe her from her Cadensor and then to go into Rhuidean. We are not told specifically that she's doing this to become a Wise One, but it is implied, and we do not know at this time that Wise Ones can channel. In the books, Moiraine knows that Aviendha can channel because women who can channel can feel whether other women can channel, and so she starts to put 2 and 2 together on that, but in the TV show, that has not been established, and we don't see that Moiraine has any knowledge of this, so that might become as more of a surprise.
Correct, yeah. The viewers aren't able to notice that the Wise Ones can channel yet either.
No.
They're just, the wise older ladies, which
is
perfectly good form of leadership.
Yep. So Aviendha disrobes. She does not get totally naked like she does in the books, which is fine, although with the show being what it is, I was kind of surprised that they didn't take the opportunity to show more skin. But she goes into Rhuidean. As a quick aside, I just want to say, I don't know how you feel about this, Billy, but I read these books when I was an adolescent. Like, I started reading Eye of the World when I was 11, which is probably, like, a little young for it. But I started reading them then, and it did have an impact on me as a woman, the, like, casualness with which the female body was treated. Like, a good impact. Because I think a lot of young girls in American culture get this, like, understanding from the culture that our bodies as women belong to men and are, like, for the viewing pleasure or other types of pleasure for men in our, like, kind of toxic masculine culture. Like, reading these books, and they're not the only feminist books that I read. I liked a lot of different types of feminist books, but it did, like, impress upon me that the body is just a body. And, like, the way that Robert Jordan talked about, like, the women stripping down and, like, being warriors and just, like, not being concerned. Like, I didn't see that as fetishing. I saw it as the opposite of fetishing, because no one cared about their sexuality. It was like, they're just naked because they're naked.
Yes.
Like,
and I did like that about the Aiel, where they very much came across as a lot more gender equality while still having, some roles of they have the Wise Ones versus Chieftains.
Yeah.
So they,
yeah,
it's not 1-to-1, but it's also not a power dynamic that's, this gender's over the other.
And he showed that in multiple cultures in different ways. Yes. Like, the way that the men and women are equal differed by culture and by society. Yeah. And so you got a lot of examples of, like, how this dynamic could work, where it's not a patriarchy with one gender stacked on top of the other one.
Yes.
And all of that implies. So anyway, that's kind of a quick aside there. Not really super important for the episode or anything, just something I thought about when she was disrobing and didn't, full on go naked. But again, that's fine. Okay, so then we have an episode where Moiraine and Rand are... Wait, what's happening here?
Moraine's trying to get Rand to open up to her and tell him about plans.
Oh, that's right.
And Rand is basically trying to get her to state flat out that she will not use this against him and will, like, fully support him and all this stuff. because she's not allowed to lie.
Yep.
And so he's looking for that reassurance.
Yep. And these conversations happen in the book. They don't happen like quite in this way, but like Moiraine in the books has been like trying to corral Rand for several books now and struggling with it. So like in book 1 he trusted her, and then in the subsequent books he started to distance himself from her because he realized that the Aes Sedai can't be trusted even though they don't like flat out lie to you. They are trying to manipulate you, and so he does not trust her, and she will not say that she will be in his best interest as opposed to her interest or the interest of the White Tower. And she's still holding back on that in this episode, which I think was good because they're putting it right before she has this experience of going into the rings and realizing what is required to save the world from her. So we're going to probably see a flip from her on that in the next episode or next time we see them. Yeah,
which was a good scene. I will say Moiraine has very much been unlikable.
The whole show.
She's
just
really
irritating. She's just irritating from like beginning to end. She's like not the worst Aes Sedai, but in the book she was like one of the best. Yes. Like he got really lucky with Moiraine coming to find him because she was like a Dumbledore type character with a lot of like philosophical wisdom and understanding of the larger picture, and was not selfish in what she was doing. And with this
meant to be like a scholar of the prophecies, and
yes, she'd researched everything. She blew agita metal and causes all of that. And in the TV show, it's like she's obsessed with her ex-girlfriend Swan Sanche and her sister and Kyrian, and just like I don't know,
kind of an air of self-righteous.
Self-righteous without earning it. She's not as much of a healer or a helper as I don't know. She's just her character is kind of petulant. Like a lot of the Aes Sedai we see later in the series, like Jolene is like one of the worst ones for petulance, but like, they
are very much skipping over the established Aes Sedai tranquility level that they're all supposed to be trying to maintain.
The reputation of the Aes Sedai is in tatters before we start in the TV show.
To be fair, they already blew up the tower.
They already blew it up, okay, so then it shows like this group of people heading towards Rhuidean, and I wondered then why Aviendha went separately earlier. That felt like a little wonky with the editing or something. I don't know, but whatever, I forgot about it. They stumble.
I guess it was implied that Rand might not be going in already, or some people wait.
Yeah, I just felt like they weren't there yet. And Aviendha went ahead of the group, and then they travel the rest of the way to set up the encampment. Or it was just a little bit janky. Yeah. Might have been some kind of an error that happened in editing. It worked out okay.
Yeah. Overall, not too critical.
Not too critical. And then the Shadow show up with Savannah and Couladin, which we were pleasantly surprised that they were keeping both of those characters. We don't know too much about them yet. They said very little, but they do look like they're going to be villains, which is accurate. So
came across very much the hot-headed hostile.
Yep. And they kept Couladin's brother having already gone into Rhuidean, and the concept of him coming out and being a clan chief if he makes it through the pillars. And then Couladin could go next if he asks. And if they stick to the books, I know what's going to happen next with that. Not sure if they're going to stick to the books, but see. So far everything was close enough to how things unfold in the books. There's like fewer people, but that's expected, for a story like this. Okay, so then Rand asks if he can go into Rhuidean. He asks incorrectly, like he observes the wrong forms because he asks in the way that he saw Aviendha ask, and Couladin makes fun of him, but the wise ones are like, yeah, that's not the important part of this. What's important is that he asked, and so they give him leave to go, and then Egwene asks, sort of, and they tell her she has a different destiny, which I assume is to learning to dreamwalk, so we'll see that in a subsequent episode. And then Moiraine asks because Melaine dropped accidentally in this previous conversation that if she doesn't ask, she will die or may die. So she asks, and they also let her go, and Rand and Moiraine walk in together with this explanation from Bear that Moiraine is to go to the rings and Rand is to go through the glass columns, that Moiraine will see the future and Rand will see the past. In the books, they do not get that much of an explanation, but I feel like that addition was helpful for a TV show because we're not going to get the internals of the characters and like any of that
It's
help.
one of those where you could have followed it without it, but I think it was helpful.
It was helpful.
As well as they did some repetition of that while he was in the columns. Of saying, oh, one step forward is further back in the past. Like, okay.
Yeah. So I think that worked fine. That was like a, change in the script from the book that was necessary or at least helpful to give audiences a less confusing experience. So, all right. So then what happens? We have all of that was the cold open.
Oh yeah.
All of that we just watched was like, whew, that's a lot going on. And then we have 50 minutes left of this show. So we go into Rand and Moiraine entering Rhuidean and noting that the statues and the overall like ambiance of the city doesn't look like something Aiel built, which isn't in the books directly because Moiraine and Rand do not walk in together in the books, but I think having them together in the TV show is a good change because it allows us to have dialogue that can substitute for the internals that they have thinking in silence in this like holy place.
Correct. As well as from the books, Matt was with Rand originally.
Yes.
Yes.
You
feel sad for that whole arc, but with where the episode started, I think they did the best with it.
They did the best that they could for how they are reshaping the distance between people and who is doing what where. I'm still curious about how Matt is going to form his army when not being with everybody in Rhuidean, but I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. We get a little bit of back and forth between Moiraine and Rand about Avendesora, like, what is this? And Moiraine saying that we knew that Aiel had it, which I don't remember the Aes Sedai knowing that in the books, but that's fine. And that it's 3,000 years old, which they would have at least be able to guess at.
Yeah, so, I mean, based on the visions of the past we saw that at least some Aes Sedai knew about this.
Yes, but the current ones don't. I'm pretty sure the current ones, I would have to go back and look in the books, but I don't think that they knew.
The cutting that was given to Carian that they have.
That's true, I guess.
So they can imply it.
Yeah, so they do have a conversation about the Carianan and the Aiel, not the friendship exactly, but they do say that the Aiel gave the Carianan a sapling that was from the leafing of the Avendesora tree, and that Moraine's uncle cut it down, and that's what led to the Aiel War, which was what led to Rand being born. So there's kind of like that, ripple effect of the pattern leading to Rand and Moiraine having this, like, connection to each other that they aren't aware of and did not actively create. That conversation doesn't happen in the books, but all of that information is accurate. So this is good enough place as any to drop it in terms of adapting the TV show from all the bits and dribbles of things that you learn reading the books.
Again, one of those timely drops of information because it's referenced directly in the visions he sees later.
Correct. I did have this is a tiny note, but I think it's Rand that says, sometimes fate seems so strong. And I keep wondering why they drop in the word fate instead of the pattern. Because they reference the pattern later in the same episode, but I feel like that kind of religiosity of the world is not baked into the script. And it's fine, but it just seems like that would be an easy thing to add, the kind of that religious context, especially with the opening with the song and everything, showing that they at least understand that this is part of the world, but they never talk about it. Yeah. So, I don't know. Yeah. Oh, and then you didn't like this. Rand says to Moiraine, "You should not have come here."
It's just a complete non sequitur and
why?
No explanation.
Yeah, no, he doesn't say why she shouldn't have come here. It just, I don't know, seemed like a way to create tension between them before they each enter their separate trials, and then I don't know. It just seemed like a little kind of a throwaway line there. Rand entering the glass columns; those looked cool.
Yeah,
they looked really good.
Architecture of the city was awesome. I like the mist type vibe.
Yeah.
Checked out.
Yeah, that was close enough to how I imagined it in the books, and him seeing Couladin's brother Muradin in the distance was even book accurate, with that guy slowly gouging his own eyes out because he can't handle what he's seeing in the history of the Aiel and the columns. So Rand goes through the columns, and I was really worried that they were going to change all of this significantly from the books, and there were some changes, but for the most part, it was
pretty minor.
It was pretty accurate to what happens in the book. So The first vision is Rand of having a vision of his parents. And I want to say, and I have not checked the book, so you're getting my like raw memory of whatever it was I last read this. But I want to say when Rand walks to the columns, he does get like a brief view of his father, but it's not at this time. So in the...
Yeah, I think it was with his parents meeting or something like it's like a vision of like when they originally met or something like with his mother in the wastes.
I would have to go back and look because I honestly don't remember, but it wasn't in Cairhien during the Aiel War. His dad does not stumble upon his mother's dead body with his little babyness having been cut from his mom's womb. That didn't happen in the books. I would have remembered that. But we get the vision of his parents and some aspect of their relationship that seemed loving, and then the tragedy of having lost their child, not knowing what happened to it. And it's good enough to have added that because it does tie into like that prologue they gave us in season 1 and gives us a little bit of like the connecting to the prophecy of the dragon, which the original book version doesn't really have.
Correct. Yeah. So I felt that was a decent change. And tying back to the prior scenes, you can really understand how the process is working.
Yeah, a little different, but like a fine switch up. And then we see the founding of Rhuidean, where the wise ones have gathered the chiefs who will come and demand of them that the future chiefs do go through this ritual. And if they don't, then the Aiel will not survive. And also the prophecy of the Karakarn, so that we can understand the significance of this leadership role that Rand is about to take on later. Again, not 1-to-1 from the books, but like a lot of those lines were taken from the books. I remembered some of them, and I think that was a very well done scene overall with the old Aes Sedai.
Yes.
Yeah. And then we see the coming to Rhuidean and the building of the city, and them using a ter'angreal that we actually find out later is a sa'angreal that they're kind of making up. So I'll get to that like conflation a little bit here. But there's a Aes Sedai using a white orb, to create the columns. That doesn't actually happen in the books in that way, but it was a dramatic scene, which with the changes they're making to the magical objects, I think works fine. I didn't really object to that.
Yeah, a perfectly, I'm gonna say, valid change to make, and did not, negatively impact how the logic of the story goes. Yeah,
it was at worst unobjectionable, and at best added some like exciting dramatic flair to the episode. Okay, and then we get Luwin in the Wagons, which is also played by the same actor, and they did that a couple times, which I thought was fine. Where we learn that the Aiel are the Tuathawan, although it is not explicit in this scene, but we see Rand's ancestor literally hugging the trees. They're tree huggers, you guys. They're ultimate hippies. Like they're following the way of the leaf. And Luwin has 2 friends who are kind of reminiscent of Matt and Perrin, and they learn that some girls were stolen from their community, and they go and try to rescue the girls, and they end up in a violence sequence with these marauders that they kill with a spear, and then choose not to take the sword because that's a weapon, then take the girls home and their families reject them. And that was pretty close to what happens in the books. Like I want to say I remember one of the girls that they rescued taking up a spear and going with them.
Yeah, but something like that. It was always...
It could have been a different one. There were a couple.
It was a bit wonky of, and these 2 go their separate way.
Yeah.
And become the Aiel.
There should have been more people involved, because I think this happened, in several different, clans or septs that were created over time, because it's not just Rand's ancestors, but all of the chief's ancestors that go through this process. But regardless, we get the sense of, okay, they used to follow the way of the leaf, now they've been rejected by their people. Then they do another one that shows how the Tuathawan split off from the original Aiel, so that we understand why there are traveling people both on the other side of the spine of the world, and then what the Aiel become on the desert side of the country. So that happens, and then we go a little further back, where and this one had a little bit more liberty taken in. So there's a middle scene where Moiraine walks up to the Aben Dessora and uses the one power to part it, and inside there is an orb. We don't know how she knows that there would be in Sarangrial or Turangrial within Avendesora. I'm going to guess there's some like tower lore or something connected to it. Yeah. Again, in the TV show version, because this orb doesn't exist in the books. They are conflating something that does exist and simplifying it for the TV show, which I think is fine. So, we'll talk about that a little bit. So there's a piece in they go further back to the breaking of the world when the Aiel are given into their care the orb that we see Moiraine take out of the Avendesora, and they're told that this is the Sakaran, which is what Lanfear talked about with Rand in her dream in the previous episode. It's the most powerful Sangreal for a woman to use, and if a man and a woman use both the orb and Calendor, the sword, at the same time, they would be like unstoppable. This is not exactly the same as in the books, but I think it's one of those adaptations that seems fine to me. Yeah. Because it's complicated in the books. Calendor is a separate Sangreal, and then there's like 2 keys that access giant statues that do the same thing as but bigger and more scary because it was never tested to see how it would work. So they've simplified it and just said, okay, instead of there being 2.5, there's just one giant one for women. Or one orb for women and one sword for a man. And I think that that's an okay change for the TV show. I was fine with that.
In the book series, it did get a bit complicated, and simplifying with the Angreal works.
I don't really think anything is lost in doing it that way. So this back scene, they showed this Aes Sedai giving one of Rand's ancestors the orb for his keeping, and they loaded up on a really fancy wagon that's still drawn by a horse. That was funny. The horse budget is back, you guys. This is the time that they're utilizing their one horse budget so far for this season. And Rand's ancestor is shown to climb up onto the wagon, and he has a gay partner, which is not from the books, but that's fine as long as he somehow has children at some point, because that's the whole point of all of this.
That's supposed to be based on ancestors.
Yeah.
But wait a second.
What do I think about that? But they could have some. They could be
in a throuple or something.
They could be in a throuple. Thruples are a thing in the TV show. I didn't like when Rand's ancestor whipped the horse, though. That seemed out of character for the Aiel after this whole sing and dance about how peace-loving they are. And he's like, go, horse! You're not going fast enough! And has this, look of rage on his face. And it's yikes, calm down, sir. That horse did not deserve that. And then they go back even further, and we see another ancestor of Rand's talking with Lanfear back when her name was Mirren, and how she's a researcher and she has discovered the thinnest part of the pattern, and behind that a new power, a true power that can be used equally by men and women, and it can change the world potentially. So that is not directly line by line from the books, but pretty close.
Yeah, it's
pretty close. In the books, she has a research partner that she is sharing that information with, and I think Rand's character is a servant to both of them, because all of the Aiel were servants of the Aes Sedai, or were,
Correct,
so he overhears them talking about it as opposed to her imparting this knowledge onto him, but close enough. And then we see him rejoining his brethren out in the fields, and they're thrashing the wheat while singing what we assume to be the song, which is not exactly what happens in the books, because in the books they're using the song to grow the Avendesora tree. I'm not sure why they didn't do that, but it's fine.
It's one of the that'd have been a nice little thing, but it's not critical. Really.
Not critical. And in the books, the Ogier also sing with them. That's part of the magic of the song, but it's fine. They're thrashing the wheat, and in the background there's this Death Star looking thing hanging in the sky, which is it has a name, the research center, but from that they open the bore, which is what allows the Dark One into the world, and this giant orb thing crashes.
Correct.
And it creates the beginning of the War of Power, which eventually leads to the Taint and the breaking of the world, which we don't see all of that in the history of Rhuidean from this, but there's more of that in the book version. There's a few more viewpoints that dig into what happens to the male channelers and how they tried to save them but couldn't, and some other things that they didn't cover, but I'm sure we'll cover otherwise.
But in general, it accomplished
the gist of it,
for,
the gist of it was covered. And And so then Rand survives his foray into the columns, and he gets through it, whereas Couladin's brother does not. That guy collapses dead in the columns because he can't take the fact that the Aiel are Oathbreakers. He's unable to learn, and so he dies, which I think is a great lesson all of us can learn, even today. And then Rand finds Avienda has gotten out of the rings, and they have a quick conversation, which I don't think happens in the books. I think Matt and Rand see her running, but they don't talk to her.
Yes, I think they're fully separate.
Yeah. My husband and I had a brief conversation about, like, what happened in the books, because it is a little bit different. So just to catch you all up, if you read the books a long time ago or have never read them and want to know what's different. In the books, Matt also goes to Rhuidean with Rand. Avienda goes separately from them, and they do not talk to her or encounter her in the city, but she does survive and goes back up to be made an apprentice of the Wise Ones. Moiraine goes in separately. They also do not talk to her. And she comes out a bit later, and Lan has to carry her back because she's exhausted and dehydrated, but is not carried out by Rand the way she is in the TV show.
Correct.
But, like, it's generally the same. Matt being there is important because in the book version, Rhuidean is like a cache of all of these Terangriel and Angriel and Sa'angriel that the Aiel had carted from whatever the equivalent of the White Tower was in the Age of Legends over the spine of the world for safekeeping, and then all the Aes Sedai died out and no one ever claimed them. So they're just like all of these powerful objects just like roasting in the desert.
Yeah. Well, like strange looking things.
Yes.
Similar to the rings and glass pillars, those were meant to be unreal.
Stuff everywhere. And that's where Rand sees the keys for the most powerful Sangreal ever made, which in this version, again, is just an orb. And he also takes the little fat man with the sword, the little Angreal that he uses many times in the story to beat out other male channelers and female channelers. So he has some treasure hunting that happens in Rhuidean as a result of him being there.
Yeah, and Matt's whole plot in there involves visiting the realm of the Ethan, which
second time.
They're probably going to cut.
I think they've already cut it.
Basically, you have to. Yeah. And ends up getting out by way of death from their realm and hanging from a tree where Rand finds him.
Correct.
Which, shockingly, we had men show the vision of him hanging.
I don't know how they're going to work that in, so my guess is they're going to do something with Moghedian and Tanchico to get to that. Yeah. I don't know how. Also, we still haven't seen Tom, so maybe he's in Tanchico, and we'll join them there. I don't know.
Yeah. Who knows? But without Matt there, I think their adaptation of Rhuidean was
fine.
Perfectly good.
Yeah, Matt doesn't actually do all that much among the Aiel. His importance comes in after they cross back over the spine of the world. Yeah. So we, I guess, just have to wait and see how they manage to weave that back into the main storyline. So overall, though, like, I liked this episode. We didn't talk about Moiraine's visions. Moiraine, in this whole time, we've seen like little bits of her having visions of how she is trying and failing to control Rand in a variety of different ways, which include sleeping with him, sleeping with Lanfear, trying to control him, bonding him, killing him, trying to coerce him in a variety of different ways, and it all ends in failure. And then she also sees herself dying over and over and over again, primarily Lanfear killing her. And I'm going to guess, which is a little bit different from the books, but I'm going to guess that Lanfear actually will kill Moiraine in the TV show.
That would be my guess as well. And
because they've gotten rid of the Aeflin and the Elflin, so we don't need the doorframe sacrifice at all.
Yes. And my guess is that Moiraine is going to make it so her death is somehow impactful to make sure Rand does not trust Lanfear anymore.
Something like that. That sounds that sounds like a good guess for how they're going to, change it up in the TV show.
I think they did a pretty good job of visually in making them very short as well, of just like the quick snapshots of
the rolling. It's a little nauseating, but like it worked in terms of like a montage of quick reference points of this
Especially-
did not turn out well for you.
Especially when they were saying, like,
Yeah.
yeah, you'll see thousands and thousands. I'm like, okay,
we don't need
we're not
thousands.
going to watch
Few dozen
thousands
is
and
fine.
thousands of long
Yeah,
sequences.
too much. And she can, in the books, like, just to be clear, like, we don't learn all of that Moiraine sees. She gives a couple dribbles of, like, some things that she tried, so they can be kind of liberal with this, and it can still make a pretty strong impact, so I think they did a decent job of that, depending on how they end it.
Yeah.
So it could be different in the TV show. We don't know, we haven't gotten to that part yet, but it could be the, close to the end for Rosamund Pike's
And quite frankly,
role
it
in this.
it made for some fun visuals as well.
Yeah.
Of just her killing Rand, bonding Rand, getting killed a lot, having sex with
Yep.
who knows?
All the things. So then in the end, as the dawn is coming, Rand is seen carrying Moiraine out of Rhuidean, and he has the two dragons on his arms that appeared with the sun, which is not a detail I remember from the book, but works fine.
Well, they appeared after he woke up after the glass pillars in this series.
Yeah.
So he had actually been sitting around waiting on Moiraine with them on his arms for a while.
Yeah.
So at least 2 days, I think they mentioned that Avienda came out 2 days earlier
Whatever the books or the TV show.
in the TV show.
In the TV show, they say Avienda came back 2 days earlier, but it's been almost 7 days.
Okay.
And if anyone has gone a full week, it's like we determine that they're dead.
Gotcha.
I want to say in the book it's 3 days, but I would have to go back and check.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
One of those, like, the
been
timing
some
is not
days.
super clear.
It's
It's
been
more
some
than
time.
letting you know, like, oh yeah, Rand walking through the glass pillars. That actually took a little while.
It took some time, and also Moiraine was in this, like, traumatized state in the rings for some time.
Yeah.
Like, days and days of time. And also that gives Couladin time to hatch his sneaky plan,
Yes.
if they are going to do that in the show. So, yeah, and then we see that Lan is waiting anxiously for them to return, and he, like, I think sheds a tear a little bit, which is a little bit confusing, because he should be able to feel that she's alive through the bond.
And, like, approaching. Too,
Yeah,
so.
and that she's getting closer.
But
But
that she's in a rough state.
the bond has never been, like, fully explained in the TV show, so it might be a little bit different. And they have Rand carry her out instead, and they all join the others on the hill, and there's this kind of a moment where Rand and Moiraine look at each other, and I think that's signifying that Moiraine knows what it is that she has to do, and she's, like, kind of, like, taking a deep breath. Like, for what is actually required of her to save the world.
Yes. And my hope is that there is some, I would say, kind of redemption arc of her personality shifting.
God, that would be nice.
Away from how she has been acting this.
I would care more if she was more like her original character from the books, because I loved her a lot in the books, and in the TV show I just do not like her. As much as I like Rosamund Pike, I do not like the character Moiraine
Yes.
Demidred in the TV show. I just don't like her. So,
But I think that was a good end for the episode as well.
It was good.
Like, it had a full arc of doing that city all in one.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot, that will come after now that he has the tattoos.
yeah. Yeah, this was, again, to wrap it up, this was the best episode. Not just this season, but of all the seasons that have come out, this is the best one. And I think it is because it is closest to the source material of any episode that we've seen.
Yeah. And by that, a lot of it is just, because it didn't have a lot of glaring logistical flaws.
Exactly, because when you are writing a book, you have to think through all of this stuff. I've done it. I've written books. It is hard. And I feel the TV show doesn't give that narrative thinking it's the respect that it's due.
Correct.
And just kind of it's that's what's frustrating about the story. It's not that they make changes; it's that the changes they do make
Don't make sense.
don't make sense, and they make the story worse.
Yes.
Yeah. So we liked this episode. We are hopeful that there will be more episodes like this in the rest of season 3. Yeah.
Yeah. It would be great if it turns around, although it will be awkward recommending a TV show going, don't worry, by the middle of season 3 it starts getting good.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Yeah, there's one episode in the middle of season 3 that you should watch all the episodes before that to get to. That's a little dark.
A little
It's
bit.
a little sad. But it is what it is.
But
so
if they all stay to this quality, I'll be happy.
yeah, me too. So I guess we'll see if next week we are happy. So tune back in for our review of episode 5 of The Wheel of Time, coming up shortly.